Hi everybody, Andrew here. In this video I'm going to talk to you about prefab libraries. So after you've initialized the plugin, inside the RLD app hierarchy you should have an object called RT Prefab LibDB. Basically this stands for Prefab Library Database. Now I just want to say this module is entirely optional, so if you don't need it you can just delete it and nothing bad will happen. But in this video I'm going to discuss how you can use this and how it can be helpful to you. So this is basically a database of prefab libraries. A prefab library is basically a way of organizing, it's just a collection of prefabs that serve a specific purpose. So for example, you can have a library called Dungeon Walls, which contains a series of prefabs that can be used to build the walls for a dungeon. You can have dungeon floors or dungeon props, for example, right? So it's a way of categorizing prefabs based on the role that they play inside the scene. So let's see how you can actually use this. Currently, so if you select the RT Prefab LibDB object, you will get this UI here. There are no libraries currently created. We will need to first create a dummy library. I'm going to call it drag and drop. We need this dummy library so that we can get access to this drop area right here. Yeah, so you have to press create library, and then it will create a library with the name that you specify here. And once you do that, you get this nice area here that you can use to drag and drop prefabs or prefab folders. So for example, let me just lock the inspector. I'm gonna go to multi-story dungeons, prefabs, props, right? So if for example, if I take a prefab and I'm drag and drop it right here, that prefab will be added to the active library. Sorry, the active library is shown here, and it's currently set to drag and drop, which is the only library that we've created. Now, much faster way of creating libraries and prefabs is basically just dragging and dropping entire prefab folders. So right now I'm gonna take this entire props folder, drag it and drop it right here, and what that will do is it will create like the entire folder structure will be reflected in here. So for example, we have this folder props here contains the alchemy, books, furniture, and so on folders. So you can see we have a props folder, that props library that was created for us, and then an additional library for each of the subfolders like alchemy, books, furniture, obsolete, and presets. Now you can change the name of a library using this field here. And you can clear a library. Clearing the library means removing all the prefabs from a library by pressing this button here, right? And you can also remove individual prefabs by pressing the remove button right underneath the prefab preview. Now, if we switch to play mode now, nothing will happen. It's just an empty scene. But we have this button here called Create RT UI. If you press this button, the system will create a new object, a canvas object, that allows you to work with these libraries at runtime. So we'll create this UI, which has a drop-down, allows you to switch between different prefab libraries at runtime. And when you click on one of the prefab previews, it will instantiate that prefab in front of the camera. And of course, you can just use that prefab to populate the scene. For example, right now I'm using a feature called surface snapping, which basically allows me to snap objects to a surface such as a mesh or a terrain. In this case, it snaps to the grid because we have no meshes. And you can also scale objects and rotate them, but this is the subject for another video tutorial. For now I'm just gonna talk about the prefab management stuff, right? Okay, so we have a bunch of buttons here. Remove active, which removes the active library. Yeah, so if you want to remove the alchemy library, you press remove active and it will remove it. Remove all will remove all the libraries, and remove empty will remove only the libraries that do not contain any prefabs. In our case, this will be useful because, for example, a drag and drop library does not contain any prefabs. we've only used it as a way to just drag and drop stuff here in this area. So I'm just going to press remove empty, and now we only have we're left with prefab libraries that actually contain prefabs. The obsolete, I suppose if it's obsolete we can actually remove this. Yeah, so we're only left with these guys right here. Now you can also change the look and feel of the prefabs of the prefab previews. You have here background. We can change the background color. Let's change this to something, I don't know, something like this, for example. I can change the preview width, preview height, and also the light intensity. So I recommend that you leave the light intensity to 1. Seems to produce nice results, but of course feel free to change it to whatever you wish. Also the background color, I find that this gray color works really well, but again you're free to change it if you wish. Now these changing these settings will not have an the changes that you make here will not be automatically reflected. So you will need to press the refresh previews button to make those changes, to activate those changes. This will just regenerate the textures for all the prefab previews. And now if I switch to play mode, you can see that the prefab previews now contain the updated background color. Now ultimately, of course, your goal is to make the previews look nice at runtime. Yeah, so you might come up with something that looks nice in the editor, but probably just doesn't look very nice at runtime. So you might have to switch between play mode and editor a few times before you actually decide on something that looks good for you. You can also change the appearance of the, for example, drop down. If you want, you have this RT active lib drop down. This is the drop down that allows you to choose the active library, and if you click on it, I actually locked the inspector. If you click on it, you can change stuff like the background color, and a bunch of other stuff. Of course, this is UI, this is Unity UI stuff, so I'm not going to go into detail here. And you also have the RT Prefab scroll view, which is the the control that basically shows the prefab previews, right? And what you want here is you want to go to the content, which is the actual control that it contains a grid. It has a grid layout group attached to it, which basically controls the number of rows and columns that can be used to that are used to display the prefab previews. Yeah, so feel free to change these as you see fit. Just play around with them. All the controls are children of this panel object, and you can just resize the panel object if you want to make this bigger or smaller. Yeah, I just came up with some defaults that just look good in my case, but of course everybody's tastes are different, so feel free to change whatever you need. This is actually an instance of a prefab. The prefab is package common, prefab management, no, resources prefabs. Yeah, so this thing right here is created from this guy. So if you want to make changes, to this UI, you might just want to delete this and then replace it with the thing that you've with the updated UI, right? That contains the changes that you want to make. Just make sure that you keep the scripts intact. So you have basically there are a bunch of scripts. For example, the canvas has a RT Prefab libdb UI script attached to it. Just make sure that you don't remove that, because otherwise it will break stuff, right? And this is a prefab that represents a button. This will be used to create the buttons that show that represent the prefab previews, right? When you click on a prefab preview, you're actually clicking on a button created from this prefab right here. So feel free to change stuff here if you want to. Okay, so yeah, that's pretty much all I wanted to cover here. Thanks. Have a nice day.